My company in line, march. Load. Go to the motor. Wait for the gas to mount. Shoulder ready. Automatic. You got to push that. Automatic. Fire by foul. To the right. Commit. Fire. 1, 2. Boom. Count. 2, 3, 4. Come on. 5. Yep. 3, 4. Go automatically go back to load. Load and come back to shoulder. Alright. Fire by company. Ready. Aim. Fire. Boom. Alright.
Now, should we come back to shoulder or should we go?
Well, automatically go back to load. Alright, then back to shoulder. Company. Forward. March. Boys, it's turning. March. We're just going to do it easy. Just go out about 5 paces. Just out. That's good. Alright, forward, march. That way we can kind of make ourselves look a little bit bigger. Company, halt. Fire by foul from the right. Commit. Fire. Boom. Load, okay. Boom. Company, fire by company. Ready. Aim. Fire. Boom. Reform company. Forward, march. Left wheel, march. Forward, march. Company, right wheel, march. On. Right face without doubling. Forward, march. Five miles right, march. Company, halt, front. Fire by company, ready. Aim, fire, boom, load. Quickly, 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 keep it hot, keep it hot. Fire by foul from the right. Commit. Fire. Boom. That's a quick step. Forward march. Shoulder. On. Right face. Fucking line. Forward march. Counter march. 5 fouls left. March. Right shoulder shift. On. You want that lock plate. Right through that lock plate. Company support. On. company in the line, march. Company, halt. Left, march. Company, front.
Sometimes I'm on your left. I didn't give you permission. Denied, very good, Sergeant. Right! Forward at the ready! Forward march! Halt! Try this again. Company, right, wheel. Halt! The only one that went down.
No, I went down.
I'm not.
I'm not.
No, I don't. We're working reels, so I'm not going to be nasty.
I follow my daddy's orders.
He died. You have problems running? Yes. Then you really don't need to be a format because we do the right wheel. I know. Right over there. I know. Ready. Yeah, I'm aware of that. Thank you. Yeah. I feel bad about it, because I can't. Well, it's just that you need to keep formation. We got to have somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go. Whatever gets on it, sir.
Can't keep up. Let me know if I put you somewhere in the middle of the line.
Okay. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Keep up the lead.
How about I switch out with Faith? I mean, she is running up for second course.
She's fighting for the women, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gabe.
She is kind of like a speeder over here.
All right, Gabe.
I've seen midgets walk faster than full-grown men.
I see a midget.
Yeah, before we take a spot, I'd be
And one.
Alright, in that case, go ahead and swap with, O'Neal swap with Curtis. So you'll be somewhere in the middle of formation, so you can get back in
I
line.
see a midget.
Next is Curtis.
Race.
I'm gonna have to redo that. Warm up with O'Neal, because if you have problems, then just let everybody else here deal with it.
All right, cool.
No, it just hurts. Just hurts. Alright, now, the only reason you shouldn't be kneeling is if you're gonna be in an anthill.
Yeah. Or if you have to go in the water. Just squat. Sit there and be like, taking a dump.
Do not drop on it. Fired by company. Boom. up here, put a cap on. Fire by company. Ready. 18th. Tiberius Hastley. They can't find him. Y'all need to help us look for him. Okay.
Left, wheel!
Fire. Now, shoulder, arms. Right, face. Without double. Hey! Hey!
Halt!
5 left, march.
Company, right wheel! Right wheel! March! March!
Too damn slow.
Company, halt!
I'm way up here.
I'm trying to keep up with the line.
Company, rise!
Company rise.
I need to look into this because I'm pretty sure there's a halt without kneeling.
Company, right wheel!
Coming in.
March!
Right wheel. March.
Halt!
Much better.
Halt without kneeling.
Hold without kneeling.
Company, front of the line.
On the line.
We're already there.
We're in.
My fire.
My balls.
Forward march.
Forward march.
Carry arms.
Carry arm.
March.
Do whatever you want to with the rise and sling it.
Thank you. Everyone across, Major.
First squad, second squad. First squad. Boys coming through to the right, second squad. Boys coming through to the left. Straight out to cover. Back
Brierfield was one of their, you know, main ones, and then they fell out of. Last year we tried to. Last year's the first time in a long time they've done it, so we're trying to get it back.
Yeah, I live there.
Well, if you're interested, you know.
I don't have the time
Right.
anymore. He's interested, but I don't have I work for me. Out of Alabama. I do 20,000, 3,000 miles a week. I really don't have the inclination to do any more.
We've got some guys in Prattville and what is it, Thornton. You know, they're not too far. That maybe, you know, if you wanted to work out something to do a carpool, you know, might be able to do that. We've got a lot of you guys in our unit. A lot that aren't driving yet, so.
I did, I was the sales battery, but I was the one that found the number.
Yeah, that's
Found the numbers of sellers. I'm not even going to tell you until I found the hole.
Hold it right there. Hold it right there.
Don't take them alive!
Come here, Billy.
Whoa, where that fly swatter?
I'd like to take that rifle, but our ammo won't work in it. Get him, Gee.
Get him with that fly swatter.
Crawling on his belly like a yellow man. Look at that.
Huh? Watch him.
Oh!
There's your souvenir, Billy.
That what you coming after?
Sir, yes.
I know what it is.
I know. I had to literally get up behind him.
put the thing up or something.
Come on, if you got the guns, man! Come on!
Hey, sir, you're gonna get shot that way.
They're in the middle out there, have a free for all. You got to remember, half of the Union Army were from Ireland and overseas. You know, there was a lot of conscripts in here from overseas.
You forget, son, you're going Kentucky boys.
Now you done it. And then lousy shots too.
Ain't none of them falling.
I didn't go back far or anything. You want your fly quarter back?
Sure. Yeah, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, what you saw with the Confederates in blue actually happened quite a bit in Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Georgia, Missouri, and Kentucky. Cavalry were the best dressed Confederate soldiers that Uncle Sam could have provided. Wagon train, you eventually start dressing like them for a reason, so that you can sit there and get up on them and then fire at them. What we showed you today was basically a little bit of guerrilla tactics. We also have the ladies out there. A lot of women at the time period would defend their homes with everything they had, including taking every pistol they had and shooting a Yankee dick. Because they knew what was going to happen if certain armies were near their area. Total destruction by the Ironworks behind it. We come out here to pay honor and to pay homage to not only the soldiers and the women, but the ironworkers, the teamsters, the people who made the clothes, who made the uniforms, who made the hats, the weapons. We pay honor to everyone of that time period. I hope you have enjoyed what we've been able to show you in the last 30 minutes. This is an expensive hobby. That we do this as a hobby. We learn as a hobby to try to present you something you will never see anywhere else. People around the globe. Don't leave the ship. We're going to get everybody in trouble. If you're interested in doing something like this, you can talk to Curry, you can talk to Jeremy, you can talk to me, you can talk to Scotty, you can talk to any of these guys out here. And you see that big old white sheet back there? You can get your supply from them. Please, go and try something. They do all the way to North Carolina. If a lot of you are from here that have been here a long time, you remember 20 years ago, we used to have a large battle here every year. Like I said, we're trying to show you a little bit of tactics that you won't ever find anywhere else. Guerrilla tactics. Sorry about that. What up? Oh! Shut up! What up? What? if you ever do reenact, officers sit around about 9 o'clock in the morning and they come up with a battle plan. Battle starts at 2 o'clock. At 2:01, the battle plan is gone.
A lot of truth in that.
We're going to sit here and fire every volley in honor of our ancestors, whether they wore blue or gray or blue and gray. We also want to mention something else about today. Today is December 7th, the anniversary of the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. We want to honor all of the men and women who perished, not only that day, but in the aftermath of December 7th, 1941. Yes, we're all Americans. We honor our ancestors, whether they fought in either color or whether they had the olive drab. And if you don't believe me, veterans, raise your hands. We get to larger events, half the crew goes out as veterans. They've been there. And we owe these men everything we have. And women. So in honor of our ancestors and in honor of all of our wars, past and present, police, fire, EMS. Carry! Up! Behind the sleeve. In case you were wondering, yes, it takes a while to load one of these.
Hold gear and hope you
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for the reenactors. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our fearless women. If you look behind you, there's so many dressed too. They just didn't want to get the pretty dresses mixed up. I invite you to visit the supper. Come back tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Bring a friend. Scenario. I'm letting him do it this time, so he's going to try to surprise me. Bring many friends. Bring friends. Like I said, we want to keep this hobby alive.
Go home, advertise on
Come find me. Come find him. Any one of these. If this interests you. I'm going to tell you something. I got blood family, and I got family. This is my family. This is my family. And certain events over the last few years have done nothing but draw this family closer and closer and closer. Jeremy Booth, raise your hand. Jeremy has been spearheading this for the last few years. Give him a round of applause, please. Bibb Rifles are the sons of Confederate veterans. They're one of the co-hosts of this event. Give them a round of applause. I'd like to recognize the
chose these units to honor the men who sat there and gave their lives for what they knew was right. Didn't matter if they wore blue or gray. Remember that, please. Come back out here tomorrow. Come have some fun with us tonight. I guess they kick you out in the park clothes. I don't know. I'll be here all night. Thank y'all for coming. And we will see you tomorrow.
It's you all.
Oh, Neil, you get a cup? Where you go, dude? Hey, I ain't toting a rifle, so I can drink. What is this? 2%? Too much for you. These are 2 bottles, you get sick, not drunk.
Damn kids running off when you need them.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Attention, company. This is going to be our new tradition at Brierfield because this is our last event of the year together. I wish more people from Alabama were here, but like I said, this is the core of reenacting in this state. We're pretty much everywhere. All of us. We've had some good times this year and we've had some bad times. We gained some family members and we've lost some family members. We've had arguments with each other. We've had laughs with each other. Everything in the past that is bad is behind us. We're looking forward to a brighter future. We're looking forward to recruiting. We're looking forward to bringing this hobby back to what it used to be in the heyday. I want 400 reenactors on this field in 10 years or less. I want 1,000 on the field at Taliesin. I want Selma back. You know what? We sit here and put 2,000 of us on the field at Selma. We can then sit there and tell them to kiss our ass. We don't have to be politically correct. But this is for us, the reenacting family in Alabama, for a good year that we've had and for a brighter year next year.
Here, here, here.
Another toast.
Refill.
Everybody around here knows me as a joker. I mean, I like to joke around. I like to have fun. Brierfield holds special meaning to me because this is my first ever event. And me being who I am, I'm going to drink a toast to every single one of you. Here's to you and here's to me. Friends forever will always be, but if you or I should disagree, then the hell to you and here's to me. Let's have a good weekend, guys. You can go ahead and drink, Mary.
Caleb, how about you?
Hey, 2 more rounds for one. April's looking at you. 1 more round for one.
Well, I thought there was one toast.
Yeah! Yeah! Listen up!
Wide and right.
Here, Dang, where you at? Oh, I wish I was in the land of cotton. Old times there or not. Forgotten, look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. In Dixieland where I was born, early on a frosty morning, look away, stand to live and die in Dixie. Away, away, away down south in Dixie. Away, away, away down south in Dixie.
Advance the flag of Dixie. Hurrah! Hurrah! Dixieland will take our stand.
Maybe when you're 7.
You mind if I smoke?
Nah, go ahead.
The 8th Confederate Cavalry. Before there was an 8th, you got to go back to 1860, actually 1859. 1859, the state of Alabama and the state of Mississippi called for an increase in the number of militia troops. Alabama raised more independent cavalry companies than any other state in the Southern Confederacy. 1860 rolls along and a lot of men and young boys are still enlisting in independent cavalry companies. Alabama seceded, invited all the other states to come together and form the Confederacy in Montgomery. Everybody knew that war was inevitable. The call went out for more troops. At this point, a lot of infantry troops were needed. So infantry commands were being made here and there everywhere. The 3 largest camps, training camps in Alabama were Talladega, Pollard, which is just north of Mobile, and Camp Watts, which is between Montgomery and Auburn. As more people came in, they had to figure out how to consolidate and organize the regiments. You had generals like Hilliard, which came up with an entire legion. And he had 4 companies of infantry, 1 company of cavalry, and 1 company of artillery. Well, as the war started getting kicked off in Virginia, the Yankees were trying everything they could do to probe down into the heartland of the South. So we sent half of our troops to Virginia, the other half were sent to Kentucky, trying to keep the Yankees from moving further and further south. You had the battles of Columbus, Belmont. You had a lot of campaigns where Grant and Sherman and Smokestack were trying to push further down south. Well, we all know what happened in April of '62, the Battle of Shiloh. At the time, the 8th Confederate Cavalry, all of the companies that ended up forming the 8th were at Shiloh. And by an act of fate, they came together as Wade's 2nd Mississippi Alabama Cavalry at Shiloh. That's what's on the official records. After the Battle of Shiloh, when the Yankees pushed south, they pretty much fought as cavalry alongside Forrest all the way down through North Mississippi. Once the threat of North Mississippi had pretty much come to a stalemate, Wade's 2nd Mississippi and Alabama Cavalry was sent to Tuscaloosa. There they were held because nobody knew what to do with them. There were 4 cavalry regiments that were sent to Tuscaloosa. You had Forrest that demanded assistance and reinforcements in Mississippi. And then you had Taylor who demanded and wanted reinforcements along Mobile Bay. He felt that Mobile was going to fall. And with the fall of Mobile, they could penetrate up in Alabama and spread any direction they wanted to.
hindsight 2020, we all know that Mobile, the Battle of Mobile Bay didn't happen until 1864. Mobile itself didn't fall till 65, and then Spanish Fort Blakely. As Wade's 2nd Mississippi Alabama Cavalry was being held in reserve at Tuscaloosa, there was a conflict over who was going to get them, along with 4 other regiments of cavalry who were just hanging out, chilling. They wanted to go fight. They had had all the training they needed. They had already been in Shiloh. They had already been at Columbus, Belmont. They'd already been through Kentucky and western Tennessee and North Mississippi. By now, they were what would be called seasoned veterans. The government, to end the squabbling, started instituting Confederate regiments. The regiment we portray is the 8th Confederate Cavalry. We're unmounted because we can't afford Shetland ponies at the moment, but we're going to get them eventually. You know, you got to shoot low. Yankees never figured that out. That's how we survived. All our horses, they weren't real tall horses. They were by the size of Shetland ponies. Yankees kept shooting over our heads. That's a joke. Confederate cavalry was actually ahead of their time. They learned real early, don't take a knife to a gunfight. So when the Yankees would come charging toward Confederate cavalry with sabers drawn, the Confederate cavalry would have their pistols drawn, and the cavalry battles would not last a few minutes. It wasn't until 1864 they figured out what we were doing, and they said the only way to stop Yankee or Confederate cavalry is by overwhelming numbers. Well, 1862, after they spent several months in Tuscaloosa, the Confederate government, because as I said, Alabama raised more independent cavalry companies than anybody. They would take 6 Alabama cavalry companies and put them over here with 4 from Mississippi and give them a designation. They would take 6 from Alabama, put them over here with 4 from Georgia and give them a designation. They would take 6 from Alabama, put them over here with 1 from South Carolina and 3 from North Carolina and give them a designation. The 8th Confederate Cavalry was comprised of 4 companies from Mississippi and 6 from Alabama. Our modern reenacting unit, we have members from South Carolina, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and North Carolina. We have that in one reenacting company. That's one of the reasons we chose to take a Confederate name instead of a state identification. There was an 8th Alabama Cavalry, Livingston's. He ended up getting redesignated as something else. There was a 10th Confederate Cavalry. There was also a 10th Alabama Cavalry. There was a 10th Georgia Cavalry. 10th Confederate Cavalry was made up of 6 Alabama companies and 4 Georgia companies. They had to figure out something to do with all these independent cavalry groups. The 8th Confederate Cavalry, after it was designated the 8th, was then assigned to a young general by the name of Joseph Wheeler. They were given to Wheeler because they wanted an Army of Tennessee cavalry corps. And they had already figured out, look, if we can use Forrest to our advantage, let him raise a corps of cavalry, we'll yank it out from under him, tell him to go back and raise some more, he'll do it. I don't think that was fair to Nathan Bedford Forrest, but he kicked ass with whoever he had. They were put under Wheeler's corps. At the time, you also had Wade Hampton out of South Carolina, who had Hampton's Legion. Late 1862, all of these legions were disbanded, and the different companies of these legions were sent out to fulfill obligations and other regimental roles. Holcomb's Legion Hampton's Legion, Hilliard's Legion. Why they all start with an H? They all got broken up, and the artillery was sent different places, cavalry sent different places. Well, after the 8th Confederate was assigned to Joe Wheeler, Joe Wheeler went back over into Mississippi and aided Nathan Bedford Forrest for a little while. Bragg recalled Joe Wheeler and told him we needed to fight in Tennessee. And Joe Wheeler took his cavalry corps and basically ignored Bragg, which ended up saving thousands of lives. If more people would have ignored Bragg, it would have saved many more thousands of lives. Bragg, for some reason, seemed interested in nothing but organization and court martials. He didn't know how to fight. Well, 1863 rolls around. They've already had actions back in Kentucky and Tennessee. And 1863 rolls around and we get to the Battle of Chickamauga. You had Longstreet come down from Virginia. You had Hood down here, which in my personal opinion, they should have stayed in Virginia. We still have this problem today as reenactors. People in Virginia and Pennsylvania think we do everything down here wrong. And they don't realize there were 3 theaters of war. You had the Extreme Eastern Theater, which was Pennsylvania, Virginia, Maryland. You had the Western Theater, which was all the other states. And then you had the Far West, which was Texas, New Mexico, Arizona Territory, and California. Down here, a lot of the fighting was guerrilla tactics. Spying and learning where the enemy was, knowing where they were and sneaking up on them, or knowing which way they were coming and setting an ambush. The troops down here were not as well accoutred as the Virginia troops were. There's a saying that most historians will tell you. Nathan Bedford Forrest, Quantrell, Mosby, all these other individuals were the best dressed Confederates that Uncle Sam could buy. The 8th Confederate then, after kicking ass at Chickamauga, along with Forrest, Wheeler, Hampton, they went back up into Chattanooga and held the flanks. They continued to fight with the Army of Tennessee as their eyes and ears. That's what Wheeler was called. They fought long, they fought hard, and then when Sherman came over in '64 to start the Atlanta campaign, the 8th Confederate, the 10th Confederate, and Wheeler's Cavalry Corps was in the thick of the fighting from day one. They fought so long and so hard. By the end of the war, all of the soldiers and the horses were emaciated. They were literally thin skin, skull and bones. If you look from my hat, I got skull and bones on there. That's because Joe Wheeler affectionately called the 8th Confederate Cavalry his skeleton calf. Once he came up with that nickname, he never called them by their official designation again. So they fought through Tunnel Hill, the Battle of Resaca. After the Battle of Resaca, when the Confederate Army was crossing the Oostanula River, Wheeler's Cavalry Corps was the rear guard. Well, several Wisconsin regiments thought they were going to get a little uppity and come across the river and attack the 8th and the 10th Confederate Cavalry. There were 4 brigades of Wisconsin infantry came across the river and immediately met the 8th Confederate Cavalry Regiment and the 10th Confederate Cavalry Regiment. The cavalry guys were outnumbered severely. They basically kicked the Yankees' ass back across the Oostanilla River, and in the process, the
captain of Company A that wrote the official history, put in his history, there was a young tallow-faced Alabamian who captured a Yankee major. The major demanded an officer to surrender his sword to. This young tallow-faced Alabamian produced his revolver, pointed it at the major's head and said, "Do you see this 6-shooter? This is officer enough for you," and commenced to leading him towards the POW line towards Andersonville. In that rear guard action, the 8th Confederate and 10th Confederate actually captured 6 batteries of Federal artillery, escorted them across the river, but the Confederates, Hood, trying to save his ass, left them sitting at the railhead. Yankees got them back. 6 batteries of Federal guns, that's 36 cannons. That's 36 cannons that could not be used for the implementation of destruction of Southern boys. After the Atlanta campaign, Hood headed toward Decatur. The 8th Confederate was sent with Wheeler's Corps back up into Tennessee and back up into Kentucky. At the end of 1864, Wheeler was ordered to join back up with General Hampton. General Hampton actually outranked General Wheeler by 1 month. By 1 month.
Bullet!
That's a bullet. I thought it was something else.
It's my bullet I had made. Go ahead.
I thought it was something else I can't say on video. Yes. Need to put a tail on it. Anyway. They were in Kentucky and they were fighting against the Yankees. Kentucky was, it had a lot of Southern sympathies, but the Yankees occupied it from day one and never let up. They were sent to meet up with Wade Hampton in Georgia and harass Sherman as he went back towards North Carolina and Virginia. Grant's ultimate plan was to have Sherman and his army come up and join Meade and counter and basically get Robert E. Lee between them and crush him. And at that point, they could both turn south and crush Johnston and what's left of the Army of Tennessee. Well, the 8th Confederate Cavalry heard of Yankees coming to the Confederate salt mines in Saltville, Virginia. Largest salt works we had. Salt, very important. Salt's been very important for the human species ever since the beginning of time. We've all heard the term, worth your weight in salt. Well, Wheeler sent his cavalry corps over and basically kicked the entire Yankee ass out of that part of Virginia back into West Virginia and into Kentucky. The Yankees will tell you that Wheeler murdered a bunch of blacks. The actual history of the battle, they had U.S. colored troops. And the Yankees on their retreat intentionally left the colored troops as a rear guard action. I don't know about you, but if I'm in a wartime situation and somebody's shooting at me, I'm gonna kill them first and it ain't gonna be called murder. The Yankees, it's amazing Democrats still do this today, have been using black folk for 160 years and ain't done a damn thing for them. You look at what's going, sidetrack to what's going on today. Black unemployment rate's the lowest it's ever been. The annual median income for families is coming up. The economy is stronger than it's been in 30 years.
And Epstein hanged himself.
And Epstein didn't hang himself. I would say I know something about Hillary Clinton, but this will be the last video I was ever in. I don't know shit about Hillary. Although if Bernie Sanders does get the Democratic nomination, he fondled me 20 years ago at college. The 8th Confederate then left Saltville and went back down to meet up with their orders, meet up with General Hampton. They didn't make it to Georgia. They made it to South Carolina, and Hampton was being chased by Sherman's cavalry. Sherman didn't know Wheeler was coming, so Hampton and Wheeler sat there and halted a little town called Aiken, South Carolina. And they're one of the largest cavalry battles ever held in this planet, and the Confederates won. The Yankees went around the Confederate cavalry and started back on their plunder and pillage tour. The 8th continued to basically harass the rear of Sherman's army back up into North Carolina till the end of the war. At the close of the war in North Carolina, the 8th and the 10th and Wheeler's Corps were basically the line between Johnson's army, what's left of Johnson's Army of Tennessee, and the Army of the Ohio, basically. That army had several different designations. The Yankees named their armies after rivers, whereas we named them after states or districts. At the close of the war, when Johnson surrendered, he sent messengers out to Wheeler's Cavalry Corps, and they said, you hold picket through the night. Tomorrow we will turn in arms and we will peacefully surrender. Well, throughout the night, every single one of the guys in the 8th Confederate Cavalry, and it was written by the captain of Company A from Mississippi. So this is the only official record we have. Everyone from the 8th Confederate Cavalry slung their rifles over their shoulders, mounted their horses, and headed home, refusing to surrender. The captain of Company A, whose horse had been shot out from under him 2 days before, was given the mule of a private. And the private told him, sir, you've led us since the beginning. You have a lot further to go than I. I'll find a way home. Thank you for your leadership. The 8th Confederate Cavalry, the 10th Confederate Cavalry, certain individual soldiers did end up having to surrender and have their paroles when they got to certain places like Talladega, where General Chrysler was stationed, filling out paperwork. Like I said, Yankees were more interested in Yankees and Bragg, they were more interested in paperwork and court martials than anything. When the Army of Tennessee fell in North Carolina, Wheeler addressed his men, said, tomorrow we will surrender and we will be paroled. And we'll do the honorable thing. There's no sense in continuing this on. And the men walked home. A lot of them became farmers again. They had to pick up pieces and rebuild their lives. Mississippi was about 20 times more devastated as far as property value than the state of Alabama was. But these Confederates continued to come together and help brothers in arms. The 8th Confederate Cavalry continued to hold reunions in Meridian, Mississippi every year starting in 1868. Up until the very last 2 of them died, about 1913. They weren't what you call typical cavalry. None of the Army of Tennessee guys were. We all think of cavalry as Jeb Stuart, cavalier hat, peacock feather, 4 horses marching in a column, row, miles and miles of horses, and then they'd fan out and charge toward the enemy. Army of Tennessee Cavalry wasn't like that. A lot of times they dismounted, they hid in trees, and they took pot shots because they knew they were always outnumbered. They never went into a battle with sabers drawn, but they usually ended up with sabers drawn because they'd already fired all the rounds off. Matter of fact, every time Nathan Bedford Forrest would sit there and enlist a brigade or a battalion, half of them would go into battle without arms at all. We didn't have them. If anybody's seen Gettysburg, there's a funny line in it when the prisoners tell Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, "Yeah, I think we'll fight." And he says, "We'll get these men some weapons." "Oh, well, we don't have any." "Well, just wait here a minute, there'll be some available." And it's a humorous line, but that was the truth. There was always weapons available. The 8th Confederate fought in more states than any other Confederate regiment that there was. 8 states, 8 out of 13. Only states they didn't go to were Arkansas, Texas, Missouri, Louisiana, and Florida. They put more miles on their horses and fired more rounds than any other group out there. And in my 30 years of reenacting, no one had ever bothered to honor the men of the 8th Confederate Cavalry. And when we formed our reenactment unit, I found the history. I read it to every single person. They cried. And we all said there's no debate. These are the men that we're honoring. We don't know what the flag looked like. We don't know what kind of uniforms they had. We don't know what kind of horses. We don't know what kind of rifles. But because of the captain of Company A, Captain Miller, we know who these men were. There's a reason Sherman asked Grant why he wasn't going to go across Alabama from Vicksburg to get to Atlanta. He said, "If I set foot in Alabama, I will not make it out alive." And that's the tenacity that Alabama troops have had since there ever was a thought of being in Alabama. Alabama troops have been in every major conflict since 1817, 2 years before we became a state. Alabama troops were at the Alamo. William Travis from Alabama. Alabama troops fought in the Mexican War. So if it hadn't been for the CSS Alabama itself, or the CSS Shenandoah, or the CSS Georgia or Florida, where would our Navy have been? We had no Navy. If it hadn't been for Alabama inviting every other state that seceded to come to Montgomery and come together, would there ever been a Confederacy? You want to know why I'm proud of my Confederate ancestry? Because in all the digging, I ain't found one Yankee. And I found 95% of them to have been from Alabama. And when the going got tough, they went headlong in. Many of them died. The ones that got wounded were usually taken prisoner and died in POW camps. Very few of my ancestors made it home after the war. And that's why I do what I do, to honor them, to honor the Confederacy and the Confederate legend and legacy of Alabama, to honor my ancestors, to honor the men and women that lived here in Brierfield and that worked at the Ironworks, to honor the mothers who never saw sons again, the girlfriends and wives that never saw their husbands or boyfriends again, the children that never saw fathers again. We got too many people out here who have forgotten that. Oh, well, they were traitors. I challenge anybody to show me how any Confederate was ever called a traitor. Matter of fact, anybody who sits here and says a Confederate soldier is a traitor, I should bring you up on charges of treason. Why? Because the very first law in the United States Constitution, not the organizational crap, but the very first law in the Constitution says that we must maintain and uphold the principles and philosophies of the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence says, when in the course of human events, the people find that they are being unfairly treated by their government, they have a duty and a right to break away from it and form their own nation. So just like their forefathers did 80-something years earlier, so did my grandfathers when they told the federal government to kiss our ass and leave us alone. So anybody that ever said the words Confederate and traitor in the same sentence, no, you're the one being a traitor because you don't even know your own laws. With everything that goes on today, if the federal government tells me that I don't have a right to own firearms, which is a direct violation of the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution, it's in direct violation of the Alabama Constitution, I have every right to secede and form my own government because they are now oppressing me and violating their own laws. And any yahoo that gets on the media and says, oh, he's committing treason. No, I'm not. I am following the law of the Constitution. Too many people in this planet want to go along and get along. The government up in Washington don't give a damn about me or you. They don't give a damn about our ancestors. We can continue to fight monuments coming down in courts all day long, but do you think these same courts are going to forget our ancestors that flipped them a bird and told them, leave us alone? You might get state court to do it. You think the feds have forgot? They got a long memory. Guess what? So do the ancestors of the people who flipped them the bird and said, leave us alone. Many, many men and women died, lost lives, lost property, and lost loved ones fighting for what they knew was right. Now, I ain't totally accurate. I have a watch here. This watch is my dad. My dad served in the United States Navy from 67 to 72, and then he was in the Navy Reserve. He just died this past July. That's why I wear his watch. Guess what? I can pull my sleeve over. This pink band right here. We lost the youngest member of our reenacting unit this August, a month after my dad passed away. It was a 3-year-old Maggie Sue. And I wear that for her. I don't have to sit here and count stitches, but as long as I give it the best I got and the best that I can do, and continue to learn, take my own initiative, and try to show people what it was like to be in battle, and I'm doing my job. One thing we never can do is forget.
True.
We've all seen that license plate. It's got the little fat Confederate soldier up there that says forget hell. There's a reason that was so popular, because we don't need to forget. I'm done.